Well, hello and welcome to the Smells Like Money podcast. Join me, Suzanne Chin Taylor, the DooDoo Diva, as I interview guests who are making an impact on how we manage and operate systems for conveying and treating wastewater. As a veteran of the wastewater, trenchless, and civil infrastructure industry, each week I'll be bringing you industry know-how from industry pros who know how. Join me each week as I speak with representatives of organizations that are utilizing disruptive or new technologies and methods, and executives who are excited to share how to be successful and sustainable in our vital industry. So whether you want to learn about the latest trends in technology, in treatment or trenchless, gain tips on training and retaining great talent, or simply how to be more efficient, productive, or profitable, this podcast is for you. Ready? Let's dive right in. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the DooDoo Diva Smells Like Money podcast. We are visiting today with Russel Schindler, who is the CEO and Chief Technologist of SampleServe. And this is a really interesting new technology that I wanted to bring on the show and introduce just because of Russell's interesting background of actually having been a field tech and seeing a need in the market just for us to do a more efficient and better job at the way that we are collecting sampling, how that data can be utilized, and how it benefits our community. And so with that, welcome to the show, Russell.
Thank you. I appreciate your inviting me.
Well, just to give our audience a little background on you to kind of set the tone and put everything in perspective, can you tell me a little bit about your background in the world of sampling as a technologist, as a field tech, and wastewater, and what all kind of brought this all about?
Right. Yeah. So I'm a geologist and I've been doing environmental work since I got out of college in 1987. And so, as you know, the environmental world has got many different facets, and most of the work that I've been doing is in the groundwater investigation business, groundwater cleanup business. Actually, I have several patents on different types of cleanup technologies for groundwater. But I started really kind of specializing in the investigation side and actually collecting environmental samples, mostly groundwater samples. So we developed a product for kind of digitizing, getting rid of paper. If you've ever, collected samples, and most people probably involved in this podcast or watching this podcast probably have collected a lot of samples, and everything's really done on paper right now. And paper is very inefficient. And really, the if I had to boil it down to the biggest driving force to go digital was because no one could read my writing, including myself. But I've literally had laboratories call me up and ask, they'd just be like, hey, could you have Russell please try and write better? We can't tell the difference between his threes and his fives. And so, which is true. And so, so that, I'm like, I got to figure out ways to make this, one, save time, and two, make it so that we don't have these complaints about penmanship. And the complaints are more than just complaints. They actually cost time and money in order to correct. So I started creating software that would pre-print labels and just kind of built on itself. I started actually in 2001. So over the years, the software just got better and better and better. And I had built it originally for our own purposes. I did not intend to be a software company. We were a company that specialized in collecting samples. Well, as time went on, and I'm trying to get customers to hire us to do their sampling, they started asking, like, well, hey, look, we kind of like to do our own sampling. Is there any way we could just use your software? And I was like, at first I was like, no. I'm not a software company. But then, as I heard that a few more times, I was like, you know what, maybe I should let them just use the software, because I would, I'm going to get some business from them. So it took us a while to reconfigure. And then, so we had that first environmental product, but then people started asking us, well, hey, I got a, drinking water specialty that, your original product doesn't quite fit that mold, but could you build something for us for sampling drinking water? And so that's when we built Sample H2O. And then, as COVID and flu testing and those types of communicable diseases, started to be where you could actually test sewer samples. Well, people started doing that, and then they needed a way to kind of get rid of the paper, right? Because it was just inefficient. And so we kind of took some of our knowledge from the first two products and built one specially for testing sewer systems for presence of COVID and other types of diseases.
So how are people using that data, in detecting viral loads? Where's
So
that coming into play with wastewater treatment?
Yeah, so one of our partner companies, what they're doing is they're the ones who are actually doing the actual testing, the laboratory, if you will. They're contracting with like high schools, colleges, municipalities, and they're monitoring specific locations throughout the campus, right? And so every day, at the end of the day, they would set up a composite sampler, and they would turn it on at 7 in the morning whenever the school day started, and then go collect the sample at the end of the day, and then just take that one sample and send it in and test it. Well, that gave them an early warning of whether or not there's a communicable disease like COVID spreading in their facility. Chances are somebody was going to use that facility at some point, the facilities at some point during the day. And because it's a composite sample, they can just detect, and the quantity also would give them an idea, because they would be able to tell the flow and the population in the building. It'd give them an idea of like how widespread it is, right? So I don't know all the lab technology, but it gives them an idea whether it's just one person or more than one person. So it's a really interesting technology. You actually can detect outbreaks 5 to 7 days earlier. That it's all dependent on a lot of factors, but than you would if you just did the nasal swab. So you start to shed the the DNA or the byproducts of the DNA earlier than you would before you would detect it in your nasal passage. So it really gives them an early warning. And then obviously, if there's an outbreak, they can then switch to other types of methods for detecting individuals, doing the nasal swabs, that kind of stuff. But rather than have to test all the students once a week or something like that, the cost and the logistics of it were just a nightmare. They just set up this one little sampler on the main effluent of the building, and voila, you're monitoring everybody in the building.
Wow. So that's where you were talking about the compositors, sampler. But, before you came on the show, we were talking about that people are very, very scared of digital in some ways, because they've been so used to the paper trail.
Yeah.
But once they start to use it, they love it. And you were saying something to me about the importance of managing the data from the sampling. And that it's not typically their job, but yet it still has to be managed. So how does this help those inspectors and those people at a municipal level that are really in charge of managing that data and analyzing that data, beyond what we were just talking about, that it's not their job, but it's kind of being made their job. So how do we make it easier for them?
Right. So, really the key to good software is the user experience, right? In the software world, they call it the UX, right? The user experience.
Right.
And software really should be intuitive, right? You should be able to, and if we all have apps on our phones. I mean, literally everyone carries a smartphone around. You shouldn't have to read an instruction manual or sit down and go through training unless it's really complicated stuff. An app for just collecting a simple sample should be kind of self-explanatory. And so that's really the key. Because it's on your phone, you can actually get the schedules that you need. It will remind you of when you need to collect samples and where you got to collect them. It'll even tell you like how many bottles you need to fill up, because the lab sometimes needs 1 bottle, sometimes they need 4 bottles. And so those types of details are best suited to be conveyed back and forth electronically. And then when the nice thing is, when you go to collect that sample, is for the SWR product, we actually have they call it geofencing, or geolocating. It knows where you're at because of the GPS on your phone. And so it actually, you don't even have to tell it where you're sampling. It'll just literally say, here's your at sample, number 23. sample location number 23. And then all you have to do is like, I've collected the sample right now, and it records that information, that date and time stuff has already then been, instantly submitted to the laboratory so that they can actually anticipate that coming in. Now, if you do have to ship the thing, you can actually later, as soon as you've shipped that out, now you've got the FedEx or UPS tracking number. You can actually, we've got a part of our app. You can actually just scan their QR code on, or their barcode on their package, and that becomes part of the record. And now the lab can track that package right away. So it really from the sample collection. I mean, as soon as you want to collect it, it saves you a lot of data entry, right? And then there's no more penmanship because everything's digital. It records the date and time and your location, everything automatically, because it knows where you're at and it knows who you are, right? So you've logged in with your username and password. So we know all those details, the who, the where, and the when are automatically recorded. And we know it with certainty. You can't fake I'm sure there's somebody who can figure out ways to fake your location. It's really hard to fake your location, fake the time. And, everyone knows never give up your password. So if it's your name and password, it's you probably. So, the who, the where, and the when are done with certainty. And then we also, track that when it arrives at the laboratory. We also know when you dropped it off at the shipping, and we can track it from the point of origin, the point of collection, all the way to the laboratory. So digitally. And and that can be done on paper, but it's a lot more time consuming and a lot more prone to human error.
So you can get more done in less time, because you mentioned something about what was it? The DNA, the digital chain of custody on a sample. Yes. Can you explain what you meant by that?
So chain of custody is, if we all remember the O.J. Simpson trial, right?
Right.
And one of the reasons that they really kind of broke that case and, O.J. ended up being innocent, determined innocent, was they were able to show that they collected some blood evidence at the scene, and then all of a sudden that sample got to the laboratory, and they didn't know where it was between then and whether or not, some detective, played around with it and took some blood and, planted it there, because they also had collected samples from OJ. And so that really was if you had to look back in history, like the chain of custody from that point on, because they started using this broken chain of custody in court cases, and, people who didn't have tight chain of custody were losing their cases. And so chain of custody became very important. And it's literally the who collected it and who touched that sample and where was it at every point all the way to the laboratory. So that's really chain of custody, and that's all got to be documented. And people do that right now, but they do it on paper. The thing about paper is, you just sign your name. There's not proof that it's you. And then you can write on a chain of custody anytime you want to, right? There's no timestamp like from your device. And you can say you were wherever you say you were on that piece of paper. With the mobile device, it's going to grab your GPS coordinate at the time you hit that sample button. And so we know, again, that the certainty of the who, the where, and the when. So that's really the key. And then if you transfer custody, so, let's say I collected samples and you're going to then take samples to the lab for me, you and I would go through that same process. I would relinquish custody using those same 3-part authentication, and then you would take custody using that same 3-part authentication.
How do you see this really helping wastewater and water treatment labs?
Well, it's significantly more, time efficient. Most of our field people claim it saves them about 20% more time. Some of them even say it's up to 40% more time. It all depends on your particular project. And then the best part is the data errors, which are substantial, are eliminated, right? And we can make it so that as people are entering data, and any laboratory will tell you that they frequently get chains of custody on paper at their laboratory, but they haven't filled out half the information. when you're doing a mobile device, you can make them fill out the information.
Right.
And mobile devices, mostly a lot of them have autocomplete. So you may have, many times like start typing in your address and it goes, boop, pops up your address, and all you have to do is yes. So it saves you time on data entry. You have to be careful that you're selecting the right autocomplete. But so it saves you on data entry. And then it's all legible, right? It's a big problem with laboratories. They receive stuff and they can't tell whether it's a 3 or a 5. And so it is a substantial problem, which causes them time, and time is money, to make those corrections. If they've got to pick up the phone and call like, hey, what time did you collect this? Because I can't read it. Well, when they use our app, it's all, legible and entered digitally. If the lab is using our software as well, they can receive that data digitally and no one ever has to type it in.
Does the software interface with other common things that they're using at the labs for tracking and asset management and different tasks like that, and work orders, for instance?
So the answer is yes and no. We can make if you look at laboratories, there's 50 different lab softwares out there, commonly called LIMS systems, laboratory information management systems. There's all kinds of variations, and then some people are still using Access, Microsoft Access. So we can interface with any lab system out there. It takes us a little bit of matching up which data belongs, what we call ours and what they call theirs, and so we just got to make sure that matching is done, and we can do it. It's really not a big deal, but it takes an initial setup. And if somebody changes their format, either on the the originating side or the receiving side, you have to make those adjustments. But it's really not a big deal.
Can this be used for any type of sampling? Not just the specific things that we mentioned?
Yeah, so it could be used even like in a crime scene investigation. We've actually had lots of inquiries about that, because in crime scene, just like the OJ trial, right? They're collecting lots of evidence, and they've got to be really tight on their chain of custody and all the data collection. One of the nice things about a mobile app is, and we've got this on our environmental app, is when you're collecting a sample, you can also get GPS coordinates and take photographs that are geotagged. So you can take multiple photographs, as many as you want, and that becomes tied to that sample. So when you collected that sample, here it is. And you can also collect other data. If you're trying to record a pH value that is tied to that sample. So when you do that, it's all tied together, and then it all gets pushed to wherever you need it to get pushed to.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So I love the fact that it does remove that human error and the misinterpretations. But what are some of the other ways that you've seen that labs or cities are using this just as an efficiency tool? Like, what are some of the other benefits for, let's say you are doing it on paper? What is, other than the obvious of it does make it faster, you're removing the human error, are there any other benefits, cost savings associated with moving from paper to digital, like long range?
Yeah. So the reporting side, right? So now you have all that data, and then, the lab can type in the results, and then we can actually, because we know the originating, collector, he may want that report. They might want a copy to go to the client. They might want a copy to go to the health department. So when they set up that sampling project, they can actually go, okay, when the report is done, send a copy to this person, the client, and we also want a copy to go to the health department. And so when they generate that report, it can be sent, literally seconds after the lab data is done, and everyone can get a copy instantly. And it could be 10 copies that you want distributed. So it makes the distribution of the data easier, and the setup is really pretty simple. So, for instance, if you wanted to go to the county health department, you will set up maybe there's 5 people at the county health department that need copies. You will essentially go, I need this to go to, wherever county health department, and then you enter their 5 addresses. And then when they collect the sample, you say copy the county health department, and then it will automatically send those 5 copies. So it just makes everything a lot more efficient. And then you can also format the way you want your report to look, right? You want it to be portrait on your piece of paper? Do you want it to be landscaped? You want your logo on there. So all that stuff can be quickly set up one time. And then from that point on, as soon as they enter the data, you probably want your, lab manager to review, the data input. But then all they have to do is once they review is just go, okay, complete, send it out. And it will, boom, everybody's got a copy. Some people still want a hard copy of their data,
Right.
but more and more they just don't want to deal with the paper. So,
Right.
and it's a
So,
lot easier to search information. The other nice thing about having a digital system like this right from the get-go is you can actually search by stage, right? You could search like, hey, these samples have been collected, but they have not been received by the laboratory yet. Or you can just search all the stuff that's been received, but not analyzed, or just things that are analyzed. So you can search by stage and check the status. If all of a sudden you see the one's been collected, but it's 3 days and you haven't received it yet, you can put in alarms to kind of remind you. And, so then you can manage by exception is the term that they call it. So there's a problem. It can ping you and tell you about that problem before,
wow.
without having you to, wait for the client to call you and, hey, I haven't gotten my results. It's been 3 weeks, and you're like, well, we didn't get that sample. So, there's lots of other benefits that, you can do when everything's digital right from the beginning.
So is this something that, let's say, a municipality doesn't have their own lab and they send it out, but they're collecting their samples, so they can use this software for the collection part of it and then send it over to the lab. So it's not, one isn't dependent on the other, that you have your own testing lab?
So our typical scenario is the lab contracts with us, and then we allow the lab to white label it. So they kind of market it as their own product. So they put their
Oh,
label.
okay.
Yeah. So labs are really our clients. We're actually working some deals right now for one very large state in the South that is got 64,000 samples that they collect every year.
Wow.
And so we're, working on implementing a system for them. They want a couple of modifications, but a system for collecting their samples and being able to report things, and everything's digital, right? They don't have to have any paper. Right now, it's a very paper intensive process. And they know that like we could do this all digitally and save everybody, the state, the clients, people that have to pay for this stuff, a lot of money. So we're pretty
That was
excited.
a question I was going to ask you. If, saying obviously if you're a new lab or starting out, it's ideal, in an ideal world, you'd have it right from the get-go. But how difficult is it to implement something like this, to go from a paper to this digital system? And what's the average time frame to do that before it's completely onboarded and you're really in a full digital world on average?
Yeah. So the biggest barrier is just human resistance and emotion.
Okay.
From the technical aspect, it's really not that hard. Everyone's always resist change. So we're kind of backlogged right now. So, but for if somebody called us up and said, hey, we want to switch over to this digital method, we can get them set up for just a few $1,000s, and because it's all web-based, right? So they're going to have some printers in their office to print labels with the barcodes and the QR codes. So they'll have $1,200 worth of hardware they need to buy, and we'll make the recommendations on the types of hardware. And then they're going to pay us a couple $1,000 to get them set up. And then from that point on, they're off and running. Now, we've got about a 1 month backlog. So if somebody called us today and said, hey, we want to get this thing set up, it'll take us about a month to get to it. But from once we start on it, we'll have it done by, within a week. So, and then there's a little bit of training for the laboratory people. But again, it's a very intuitive. So most people are able to, the training session is an hour and a half, 90 minutes, and they're off and running.
Because you said to me early on that, they're scared of making that transition. People don't like change, but once they start using it, typically they're like, man, how did I ever live without this? Why would I ever go back to paper?
Yeah. So when we first started doing this, we actually allowed people to print out forms kind of mimicking what we did digitally.
Right.
And they would print out the forms, and we're like, okay, we know you're not comfortable going full digital. So you can write everything down so they were duplicating, right? Entering it at digital and entering it paper. And no one uses the paper anymore. There, as time goes on, I mean, I don't know if you remember, like when there was first online banking, everyone was like, I'm not going to do online banking. Somebody could hack my money. Well, now everyone does online banking. So, I don't know if everyone does, but a lot of people, majority of people do online banking. So, it's all about, adoption and really the UX, the user experience is another big factor. So.
And I think, we talk a lot about this on the show, is that all across the board, no matter what industry you're in, but especially in ours, that we are facing serious labor shortages. Yeah. And I think the only way we're going to be able to tackle this and get what we need to, all the stuff that we need to get done, is we have to be willing to embrace technology and be open to it.
Yeah. And not just the labor shortage. I mean, cost of everything is going up. And so, if you can use technology to kind of fight against those cost increases, that it just helps everybody. So
great. Well,
Russell, one other interesting thing that you and I talked about previously is about how the DNA testing, it's just in its infancies, right, for testing COVID. But there, there's, if you look down the road, you'll be able to, monitor sewer systems and detect things like, cancers and heart disease, be able just by like, hey, we know somebody up in this neighborhood may have some type of cancer because we're be able to detect it in the wastewater system. And there's even, people that are very forward thinking, talking about how you might be able to, catch a rapist or a murderer or some, there's some crime committed and you have DNA, you can monitor the sewer system and just keep sampling upstream until you get to the neighborhood or even the building or the house where that is coming from, and be able to do that type of stuff. I see some positives that could come out of that, but also some negatives, right? So if some insurance companies got hold of that and they're like, well, we're going to stop issuing insurance claims because everyone in this town has heart disease, and we're just going to, so there's all kinds of problems that you could get by doing that type of monitoring. But that's kind of the stuff that's out there, potential, good and bad for this type of technology.
I also see that, though, in what you were saying, the good and the bad, is that for wastewater collection systems, if they're sampling, it could kind of give them indications of changes in health in the system.
Yeah.
And the flow that's coming to them, like, okay, why is this different than it was last week or a month ago? Is somebody illegally discharging into the sewer something they shouldn't be? Is someone not doing their grease clean outs at the restaurant as frequently as they should? All those little things I see. Yeah, I guess with any technology, somebody can always use it for not so good things or to take advantage. But I think there's something to be said for trying to incorporate technology where it can be used for the good, for the data. Knowledge is power.
Who would have thought, if you look at the biggest companies in the world, all the Googles, the Amazons, they're the big data companies.
Yes.
Are the richest companies in the world right now. Who would have thought that sewer systems would turn into big data companies? And that's really what they potentially could be. Like you could, capture all kinds of data out of the sewer system. So it's like I said, it's the potential, both good and bad, from this type of technology is fascinating.
So Russell, thank you for all this information. It's very, very interesting. How can people get more information about your software product, connect with you, learn more about maybe thinking about incorporating this and what it would take?
Yeah, it's a real simple, SampleServe.com. Just go there and you can see all the different products we have, and different products are for different users. And so whatever your use case is, and if we don't have something specific to what you're trying to do, let us know. We're constantly building new variations of what we do. And so I'm sure that if you're doing some kind of sampling, we'd be able to help you out.
Oh, that's great. And of course, they can always reach out to you on LinkedIn, Russel Schindler, and that's how we connected. And so again, thank you for coming on, sharing this sharing this technology. This is, a little off the beaten path for us, but I think it's, I love introducing new technology to the industry because we need to find ways to be more productive. It's not saying that we make a lot of mistakes as humans, but if we can make our jobs easier and better and more accurate, everybody wins.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. And the fact that you came as being someone that did sampling in the field, that you understand firsthand the pains of what it's like to get that phone call. Hey, was this a 6 or was this an 8 or was this a 5 or is that an S or a 5? Like, what the heck is this? It's almost as worse as the pharmacist getting that prescription and going, all right, what's the dosage I'm supposed to be giving this guy? Because if I don't understand the doctor's handwriting, I might kill somebody.
Right, exactly. Yeah. It's, those pain points are real and legit because I literally have gotten those phone calls. And, people ask me, they'll even hand me my own document and go, what does this say? And I'm like, I have no idea.
It's pretty bad when you can't read your own handwriting.
Exactly. I know.
Anyway, but thank you again. And please, for those of you who are watching, check out SampleServe, see if they might be able to help you move into the digital age with accuracy and productivity. And until next time, thank you for joining us and tuning in to this week's episode of the DooDoo Diva Smells Like Money podcast. And until then, keep it flowing. Thanks so much for joining me, the DooDoo Diva, on this week's episode of Smells Like Money. What stood out to you this week? Share your takeaways by leaving me a review. You can find out more about the new technologies, creating sustainable solutions, and insights on how to succeed in our vital industry by subscribing to the show. Whether you want to learn about the latest trends in wastewater infrastructure, treatment, or trenchless, you've got it all right here at Smells Like Money. If you're an industry expert and would like to be considered as a guest for the show, book a quick chat with me by visiting calendly.com/the2it group/B-A-podcast-guest, or simply click the link in the show notes below. Until next week, a big shout out to all my industry friends and those who will be. You are my superheroes. Thanks for tuning in, keeping it flowing, and we'll see you all next week.